Welcome to Lesson 1. Civil Rights Coverage, Legal Authorities, Discrimination, and Complaints. Lesson Overview. This lesson will focus on civil rights, USDA's FNS program authorities, and discrimination. At the end of this lesson, you should be able to complete the following objectives. Identify civil rights legislation and program authorities. Define discrimination. Identify the USDA FNS Child Nutrition Program protected classes. Outline the discrimination complaint processes. What are civil rights laws? Civil rights laws guarantee rights for individuals to receive equal treatment and prohibit discrimination in a number of settings, including education, employment, housing, lending, voting, and more. Federal dollars fund food and nutrition programs across the United States, with USDA serving as a pass-through agency. These monies are drawn from taxpayers nationwide. As a result, everyone is entitled to equal use of the program since tax dollars are intended for the benefit of all eligible persons. Legislation. The majority of civil rights legislation stems from Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which was a landmark act prohibiting discrimination on the basis of race, color, and national origin in any programs and activities receiving federal financial assistance. Title VI directly addresses what was once the common practice of denying certain persons access to federally funded services, programs, and activities based on their race, color, or national origin. Code of Federal Regulations, CFR. All of the legislation mentioned in this lesson will be referenced from the Code of Federal Regulations, which is more commonly known as the CFR. So before detailing any more of the applicable civil rights laws and amendments, let's look at where they can be accessed and what the citations you will see mean. The National Archives and Records Administration's Office of the Federal Register and the Government Publishing Office work together to provide the public with a codification, or organized list, of the general and permanent rules of the federal government. The list is published in the Federal Register, both in hard copy and electronically, by the executive departments and agencies of the federal government. It is divided into 50 titles that represent the broad areas that are subject to federal regulation. Each title is then divided into chapters, usually bearing the name of the issuing agency, which is then subdivided into parts that cover specific regulatory areas. The larger parts may even be subdivided into subparts. All parts are organized in sections, and most citations to the CFR refer to material at the section level. Structure of CFR citation. Let's look at an example to get a better understanding of a citation. Title 7, Part 210, Section 30, Subpart A. The number to the left of CFR is the title. So in our example, 7, which is agriculture. Next, you have CFR. Remember, this stands for Code of Federal Regulations. Then the numbers before the period, which is the part. In our example, this is 210, which is the National School Lunch Program. The next part of the citation is the section. It is the number to the right of the period. In our example, the 30. Finally, you have the subpart, which is a letter, like the A in our example, which references the general regulation regarding school nutrition program professional standards. The letter is used to indicate the entire subpart, not just an individual section. More legislation. In 1987, the Civil Rights Restoration Act clarified that all recipients of federal funds had to comply with civil rights laws in all areas, not just the program or activity receiving the funds. Later legislation was passed to address specific areas of discrimination. Click on the circles to learn more. Sex. Title 9 of the Education Amendments of 1972 and 7 CFR 15A. Prohibits discrimination from any education program or activity receiving federal financial assistance, based on sex. Disability. Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 and Americans with Disabilities Act 1990 as amended by Americans with Disabilities Act Amendments Act, ADAAA, of 2008 and 7 CFR 15B prohibit discrimination based on disability within any program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. Title II of the ADAAA, 28 CFR 35, prohibits discrimination on the basis of disability in all services, programs, and activities provided state and local governments, public entities, except public transportation services. Title III of the ADA, 28 CFR 36, prohibits discrimination on the basis of disability by public accommodations. The Age Discrimination Act of 1975, 45 CFR 91 and 7 CFR 15C, prohibits discrimination based on age in programs or activities receiving federal financial assistance. Civil Rights Restoration Act of 1987. Civil Rights Restoration Act of 1987, Public Law 100-259, clarifies the intent of Congress as it relates to the scope of Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, Title IX of the Education Amendments of 1972, Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, and the Age Discrimination Act of 1975, to ensure non-discrimination in all programs and activities of the recipient, whether those programs and activities are federally funded or not. National origin. Executive Order 13166 and USDA LEP Policy Guidance, 79 Federal Regulation No. 229, requires federal agencies to ensure that recipients of federal financial assistance provide meaningful access to their LEP applicants and beneficiaries to ensure that they do not discriminate on the basis of national origin. Religion. 7 CFR 16 is the overarching regulation for religious organizations to participate in USDA assistance programs. This regulation sets forth USDA policy regarding equal opportunity for religious organizations to participate in USDA assistance programs for which other private organizations are eligible. Legal authority. In 7 CFR 15, USDA is given authority to develop civil rights requirements prohibiting discrimination in all federally assisted programs or activities. This legislation also applies to FNS, which administers child nutrition programs within USDA. FNS provides specific guidance in FNS Instruction 113-1, and Appendix B, for all programs and activities, fully, or partially, funded by USDA, FNS. Discrimination. All of the legislation previously mentioned was enacted due to legal, political, and social inequalities in the U.S. that resulted in discrimination. Discrimination is a difference in treatment, either intentional or by neglect, that makes the distinction of one person or group of persons from others based on a protected class. Protected classes. Although many believe that discrimination only occurs in work-related situations, it is applicable in any instance where equal access is not offered or provided. Federal anti-discrimination legislation identifies specific protected classes to protect groups of people with similar characteristics who tend to be targeted by discrimination. According to FNS Instruction 113-1 and as identified in program regulations, there are 6 USDA FNS protected classes for child nutrition programs. Race, color, national origin, sex, age, disability. The 4 Ds of discrimination. There are 4 Ds to remember when evaluating discrimination against an individual or group because of their protected class. An individual or a group receives delayed benefits or services. Is denied benefits or services. Receives different treatment than others that is to their disadvantage. And/or receives disparate treatment, intentional, or disparate impact, unintentional effects, meaning there is inconsistent application of policies or rules based on their protected class. Examples of discrimination interactive. Consider these 3 examples. Select yes, if you think that the statement would be discrimination. Select no, if you think the statement is not discrimination. Correct. Refusing an applicant's enrollment based on disability is discrimination. Correct. Failure to provide reasonable modifications to an individual with a disability is discrimination. Click the X to continue. Correct. Selectively distributing applications to only one nationality or socioeconomic group is discrimination. Click the X to continue. Unlawful discrimination. Discriminating decisions are made each day, such as whether to speak to a passerby, or if you will wear a red or blue shirt. These decisions and actions become unlawful when the adverse act is tied to a protected class. Unlawful discrimination in any form is strictly prohibited, regardless if the program is fully or partially federally funded. Examples. Consider these examples of unlawful discrimination. Serving boys larger portions of food than girls. Failing to provide meal modifications to students with disabilities. Failing to provide program information in a language specific to the population of the service area. Civil rights complaints. A civil rights complaint is a written statement that contains the complainant's name and address and describes an agency's alleged discriminatory action in sufficient detail to inform the USDA Office of the Assistant Secretary for Civil Rights, OASCR, of the nature and date of an alleged civil rights violation. All child nutrition programs are required to have a process in place for handling all civil rights complaints. The CNP is not authorized to process complaints, must forward them to USDA. State agencies or subrecipient agencies may develop their own complaint forms, but the use of such forms cannot be a prerequisite for acceptance. For state-specific processes and procedures, please refer to your state agency or program sponsor. Complaints. A person alleging discrimination has the right to file their complaint within 180 days of the alleged action. Complaints must be received and accepted whether written, verbal, or anonymous. Confidentiality is extremely important and must be maintained. All civil rights complaints must be documented and maintained in a log, separate from program complaints. It should be stored in a secure location, such as a locked cabinet. For more details on how to file a program discrimination complaint, visit this website, www.usda.gov/oascr/program-discrimination-complaint-filing. Conclusion. This lesson covered the major civil rights legislation, the USDA and FNS legal authorities, and details on discrimination. You should now be able to identify the civil rights legislation and program authorities. Define discrimination. Identify the USDA, FNS Child Nutrition Program protected classes. Outline the discrimination complaint process. Before we get started on the next lesson, see the instructions below for accessing the post-quiz.